What the fuck in the whole conspiracy was that? For fuck's sake, I'm in the toilet, man. Jesus. What's so important that you just couldn't wait to call me about?
You have 24 hours to get the following message broadcast to the masses of Britain and America.
Wait, who the hell is this?
That doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you and your team get this message out within 24 hours. And if in the unlikely event you don't, boom, boom, bye-bye. Got it?
Boom boom bye bye. To who?
The royal family.
Oh fucking hell, thank God. I thought I was serious for a minute there. Anyway, I don't even like her, so crack on, bro. Do away with the old cunts. It's about 100, well, it is exactly 100 years since the sinking of the R.M.S. Titanic in the world's most famous maritime disaster. But I, as many others say, the whole thing was planned. It's something that must be heard to be believed, and even then many will find the story too incredulous. But I simply say the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, was the ship that went down. The claim is that the Olympic was switched with the Titanic because the Olympic was damaged in the same part of the hull where the iceberg would hit the Titanic ship, or the Olympic, that went down on April 15th, 1912. And insurance did not cover the damage. The company, White Star Line, couldn't afford repairs, so they planned a sinking instead, took out extra insurance on the Titanic and made the switch. Their plan would see them make millions and keep the better of the two ships. Was this the sinking of R.M.S. Olympic? The theory of a switch is, and a massive cover-up, has been around for years, that theory, and did not originate with me either. There is evidence presented all over YouTube and the net, but much of it seems circumstantial and unsubstantiated, and no official investigation into the claims has ever been launched. Information I use is in essence material that is in the public domain and a matter of public record. The plan to sink the damaged Olympic, which was capable of sailing but would not pass its next inspection. After switching with the ship it had been built next to, the Titanic. The sinking was to take place at a predetermined location in the North Atlantic where another ship, the Californian, would lie in wait to save everyone. But it went horribly wrong. When the ship hit an iceberg 12 miles before reaching the point it was supposed to be sunk at, and the Californian was not informed in time to get to the Olympic before she went down. There was a government cover-up. I believe the Prime Minister was involved at the time, agreed as well, that the government agreed and the Prime Minister agreed that because the government wanted to use White Star Line ships during the coming war, some crew members knew of the scheme and signed secrecy agreements. Other claims include shipyard workers being paid to paint over each ship's name with that of the other, and similar changes in lifeboats and other items. Pictures of the liner that sunk taken on the site in 2006 reportedly show the letters M and P engraved on the hull where the letters of the Titanic nameplate had fallen off. Conspiracy ideas about the Titanic. Well, it all adds up to be what would be the biggest cover-up of a maritime crime in history. There are some questions that beg to be asked, however. In the photograph of the Titanic under the ocean where it rests today, we see a hole of steel blown out of the ship, not in. Could this have been a bomb? Where were the men to close off the one compartment where the water was running into the ship? Were they killed? Were they all killed? If they were all killed, then this may explain why the water went into 5 compartments to sink the ship. Where on the photograph of the Titanic ship on the ocean bed do we see the iceberg damage of a long gash along the ship's side, cutting into the 5 compartments? Could the sinking also be blamed on the Germans? To get Britain into a war with Germany and start World War One, or World War One for the British royal family economic interests. All round, what did Sir Winston Churchill, then in the Admiralty Department, gain by the sinking of the Titanic, like the Lusitania? Hello listeners, viewers, whatever you call yourself these days, welcome to Operation Wake Up Call with myself, Paul Hayburn, and my co-host, John, also known as 007. How are you doing?
Hi there, Paul. Very well, thank you.
And how's life treating you these days?
Very well, thank you. Life could be expected. The normal, still under the intense pressure from the government and everything else. Just toeing the line, trying to make ends meet, just like everyone.
Aren't we all? Now, I am hearing through the grapevine we have a big story today. We are going to be discussing the Titanic sinking, or rather the Olympic sinking. A big insurance fraud, possibly, done by the White Star Line shipping company. Is that correct? Would you like to fill us in on?
Yeah, well, I've recently come to light that I've discovered that J.P. Morgan, you might have known about J.P. Morgan. He actually funded Nikola Tesla for the Western Cliff free energy tower. And he actually pulled the funding on that. And anyway, J.P. Morgan, as you know, is the bankers, the world elite bankers. He actually put up a £10 million fund to help towards the White Star Line. And the chairman, which was Lord Perry's, him and J. Bruce Ismay in 1907 decided between them to build 3 ships. One was the Olympic, and her sister ship was going to be the Titanic, and the third ship was going to be the Britannic. Well, as we're all aware of what happened to the Titanic, but let me just fill you in on some news that came to light about the Olympic. It was the Olympic was the captain on the Olympic was Captain Smith, and around 1911, he took the ship out on his normal voyages, and he had an accident at sea, which forced the ship to come back into dry dock to do some repairs on the hull and one thing and another.
Yeah.
About 3 months later, he went out and he went out. He was on his way out of Liverpool, I believe it was, or to Liverpool, and he had a collision with a British naval ship. The British naval ship was sucked into the propellers of the Olympic, and created a giant V-shape hole in the bow of the ship. Again, it forced the ship back in. Forced the ship to come back in again, and the insurance company at this time was not going to pay out. So they decided, okay, what we'll do, we'll repair it and send it back out again under the same captain, Captain Smith. So Captain Smith took the Olympic out once more, and also by this time, it was a few weeks later. He ran over a wreckage in shallow water, and again ripped all the hull out, and had a bent keel on the ship. So they knew that this time, the White Star Line wasn't going to get no insurance on it. So what they decided to do is, it had already cost them millions of pounds, and so what they decided to do. They held a meeting, a secret meeting, and this was J. Bruce Ismay. and Lord Perez, and they decided that they will employ some local lads who who will be, they'll pay them £200 each
Yeah.
to change the names over on the ships, because the sister ship, which was the Titanic, which was identical, um, no one would know the difference, because at this time the Olympic and the Titanic were always in the same, were always parked together in the same, in the same channel in the port. So, and what they was doing was just moving them around from side to side. So it was very difficult to decide which one was which at the time. But there was some uncanny result. There was some different differences in them, which I'll come to later.
Yeah.
So anyway, they decided to change the names over, and they ground down the Olympic signs, which were 4-foot signs, and all studded, and riveted onto the metalwork of the ship.
Yeah.
They took it off, and they re-riveted the Titanic. And then what they did, because they was identical inside, all they had to do was just change over the menus, because no one would know the difference.
Yeah.
Some carpets were refitted inside the Olympic, because to make it look really posh or something, because the lino was damaged or something. There was something in that.
Yeah.
And they decided, well, what we'll do, we'll send it out to sea as normal anyway, and we'll send it out and see if we can lose it in a sea. So this is exactly what they did. They sent it out, and but before they sent it out, J.P. Morgan was informed of what was going to happen, and J.P. Morgan phoned in 11 hours before the ship sailed and said he was sick, and he had the first class cabin, one of the best first class cabins on the Olympic, or the Titanic, which it is now, and so he pulled out. And then also there was about 40 of his other friends and family and friends also pulled out.
Yeah.
So by this time there was hardly any first class cabins available on the Titanic anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just left roughly about 1,500 to 1,800 others, second class people on the ship. Also, 1 hour before the ship sailed out of dock, before it left, J.P. Morgan again phoned up and ordered to have all his brass statues removed from off the ship, which would run into thousands of pounds.
That's about
because he must have been aware that the ship was going down and he didn't want to lose them.
Yeah.
So how about that?
That's quite the conspiracy.
Yeah, well, this is before we even get going. And so anyway, what happened is the ship went out, the Titanic, which went out, and one or two of the local merchant seamen who used to sail on board the Olympic noticed that she had a list, and this list would only have come about by the salvage work that went on to the hull, by the repairs. Also, the ship also had a propeller changed as well. And one of the propellers, that had the numbers on it. Now, on the propeller shaft, it had 401 stamped on it.
Yeah, 401.
This was on the Olympic. Yeah.
Yeah.
401, it was stamped on. So this is important. Remember that, 401. So anyway, the ship went out, and as we know about it, heading in towards the icebergs. Well, before they got out, before the accident come about, all the other ships in the shipping paths were constantly Morse coding all the other ships, so the Titanic would have been notified of the floating icebergs.
Yeah.
And they always gave them at least a minimum of 3 hours notice.
Yeah.
But most of the time they would have had 6 hours notice in between shipping. And so they was getting all the calls back of the shipping lanes. So the Captain Smith, would have been aware of this.
Yeah.
But incidentally, Captain Smith was pulled into the office before the ship sailed, and he was confronted by J. Bruce Ismay and the other chairman. I can't think of his name there. But anyway, he was called in to them and to Ismay and that. And they turned around and said to him, "You owe us because the damage, it's cost us on the Olympic. Yeah, all the repair works. We've kept you on employed here, and you owe us. So what we're intending you to do, you will know about this. You will know that these engineers will change over the nameplates. You know that the ship will going out, and we want you to actually take this into the icebergs. We want you to sink it
Yeah.
under what it. So this captain Smith, he turned around and said, like, he must have said, like, oh, how am I going to survive? And they said, well, don't worry. They said, don't worry at all. He says, why is that? He said, because we've got another ship out there. It's called the Californian. The Californian will be skippered by Captain Lord. And
Yeah.
what he'll do, he will look out for you to send up some coloured flares, the red or the blue flares. As soon as he sees them, he'll come in and will rescue you. So
Yeah.
I thought, okay. So anyway, the ship's gone out. It's in the Atlantic, like, and all of a sudden it's going over. It starts heading towards these icebergs. Now, bearing in mind that the blokes who are up in the crow's nest, and also on the deck, you can see an iceberg up to 6 miles away. And if they'd left it to an hour, they still would have had enough time to turn away from this iceberg. But no, the captain ordered the engineer, the engine room or whatever it was, to deliberately steer it into the iceberg. It hit the iceberg, and the ship was damaged now, and it was starting to have leaks.
Yeah.
By this time, they had a fire. They had fires going in the engine rooms 4 and 5, which the captain knew. But this was on fire before it actually left the docks, believe it or not. One of them. And anyway, so the captain, he turned around and said, "Okay, we won't panic. We'll keep edging going forward. About 5 knots an hour."
Yeah.
By this time, he was he said, well, what we'll do, we'll send a signal. So he sent a couple of white signals up. This went on for about 45 minutes, and they kept sending up the distress signals. And it was again about 45 minutes, they decided to put the pumps on to start pumping out the bilge, at the bottom of the ship.
Yeah.
And again, 45 minutes, he decided to let release the lifeboats over.
Mm-hmm.
And it was another hour before the captain authorised an evacuation of the ship, everybody overboard.
Yeah.
By this time, he'd let off about 18 white flares. And he'd also let off roughly about 6 red and 6 blue, or several coloured flares. But the captain of the Californian, who was about 12 miles away,
Yeah.
he kept asking his guys down on the deck. He says, "Have you?" They said, "Well, we see white flares." He said, "But have you seen any coloured flares?" They said, "No." He said, "Well, don't worry about it." And this went on for about 2 hours. And then the Captain Lord of the Californian decided, after about two and a half hours, let's head that way anyway. By that time, he noticed that the Titanic had sunk. There was about 1,700 people who lost their lives. And I think it was the Man Temple had pulled up beside them by this time and started rescuing the survivors that was left. And bearing in mind that the water was about -2, and the survival in that water would have been about 3 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you wouldn't have lived for much longer than that anyway. So anyway, so this is basically what happened. So there was always this conspiracy going on, and it stands to reason. I mean, okay, by the time they got back, the survivors, who was left over, the White Star Line pulled them into a railway shelter, the surviving crew and that, and he threatened them and said, "Look, you will not ever discuss the Titanic ever again. We don't want you to discuss it because we know who you are, we know where you live, we know your family, you know what we're trying to tell you." And everybody knew, because in those days, work was hard to come by. Everyone was fighting for their jobs. Basically, it's like it is now, but in a bit much more serious, more serious state.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, that's how it was. It went to court, obviously, and by this time, but bearing in mind, let me just go back a little bit as well, because the insurance, Lloyd's Insurance, company would not insure the Olympic,
Yeah.
right? What they did, they insured. I think it's 3 or 4 days before the Titanic sailed, which was the Olympic. They insured the Titanic for $12 million, and I think the insurance company paid them out by this time at 10 million. I think that's what they paid them out at. They got 10 million, so they got their money back, but they kept the Titanic, which was the Olympic, with a busted hull, which they salvaged in the end. You know, they got rid of it. How about that? So that's a bit.
Yeah, that's crazy, John. What a conspiracy theory. Outside of the norm. It does beg some questions, however. For instance, I'm assuming that most people have seen this picture, but in the photograph of the Titanic under the ocean, where it rests today, we see a hole of steel blown outwards instead of inwards.
That's right. That's right. Now, this is another side of the story, because the story doesn't finish here, because it goes on. Before we come forward, we'll go back again to the time when our British Prime Minister knew about the conspiracy, about what was going on, because he was threatened by J. Bruce Ismay and the White Star Line. And basically, they blackmailed they must have blackmailed him, our Prime Minister, into a submission of some sorts, because they turned around and said, look, if this got to public, if the public was to find out that the the Titanic was actually the Olympic, and that they knew that they found out that this was a scam to send the ship out to send it to the bottom of the ocean on purpose, just so we could get our money back.
Yeah.
He said that would cost the White Star Line millions of pounds, because it cost us we'd go bankrupt. And you've got to bear in mind, he said to the minister, if this did go public, that means, and we went bankrupt, you would be held responsible. This will be on your back as well. He says that you will be responsible for 40,000 Irishmen will lose their jobs back in Dublin because of this. Because we'd lose our contracts. Obviously, White Line, Star Line would go down. 40,000 Irish workers would be out of work. He said, "Could you live with that?" And the Prime Minister turned and said, "Well, no." He said, "Okay." He said, "Well, keep it quiet then." So that's where it went on then. Coming forward now, back in 1996, and it was the local Geographic Oceanica, or I think it was, the magazine. They went down and did some photographs of the Titanic, 2 miles down on the ocean bed.
Yeah.
And they went down there, and they discovered some very serious things with the Titanic. Now, the first thing, let me tell you something. The difference between the Titanic and the Olympic, you could tell the difference, is that the Titanic had 14 portholes on its bow, on the front of the stern of on the ship, had 14 portholes. The Olympic had 16 portholes. Now, when they took the photographs down 2 miles down of the Titanic, they noticed that the Titanic had 16 portholes, not 14. They also noticed that through the records that the Olympic, when they painted the Olympic originally, the Olympic had a grey undercoat. The Titanic never had a grey undercoat. It had a dark undercoat. Now, when they took photographs of the Titanic 2 miles down, they noticed where the black paint had come off the bows of the ship, they noticed grey undercoat paint pointing back to the Olympic.
Yeah.
It doesn't end there. Then they noticed that the propeller bared the number on the right side at the back. What do you call it? The starboard side, is it? I can't remember which is port and starboard now. Port is your left side, starboard side on your back. That's right. The propeller, it bore the numbers. This is what I said, hold on to those numbers. It bore those numbers, which was 401 on the propeller. It was stamped on that. So again, pointing back to the Olympic. because of the damage. Remember when it went?
Yeah,
It,
yeah.
you know, it ran into that wreckage. It doesn't end there. Then they come round to the back of the ship where the Titanic was all stamped on. And remember that the Titanic lettering, the lettering is 4 foot from top to bottom,
Yeah.
and these are heavily metal rivets that they riveted up. They used to rivet the letterings on. Two of the letters had fallen off, revealing what was underneath, and underneath it revealed M and P, which is part of the original ship that says Olympic.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So
But
that is very interesting.
the question that I ask is, we see the hole blown out of the ship outwards, but not inwards. Could it have been a bomb instead of an iceberg, do you reckon?
No, it's clearly, they all clearly state, even witnesses stated that the ship actually did hit the iceberg because they could hear a rumbling noise, like a scraping. Yeah, as it was
Yeah.
in the film. I mean, the film portrayed the exact image and exactly how it was portrayed from the witnesses.
Well,
You know,
here's
and
more of a relevant
you know,
question
when,
then. Here's more of a
yeah,
relevant question. In the 97, I think it was 97, it was brought out, movie Titanic, about the Titanic, or Olympic in other words. Is this why we see Captain, well, you say earlier on Captain Smith, so we'll just call him that. Is this
yeah.
why we see Captain Smith shoot himself in the head, committing suicide? Do you think there was a bit of guilt there, and that's why the captain shot himself, other than the reason portrayed in the film?
It's very possible because it's quite possible because there was a couple of ship's mates or ship's engineers who actually committed suicide several months or several years later. I think that was guilt, you know, living with the guilt of what happened
Yeah,
on that time.
yeah,
But I mean, we know the history of J.P. Morgan. We know the history of the bankers and the powers that be, and they will not stop at anything to get what they want. And that's unfortunate, really.
yeah.
And everything's covered up. You know, they cover their tracks very well, but that's just the way it is.
Do you
And
think the sinking could have been blamed on the Germans, for instance? I mean, to get Britain into war with Germany?
no, because at the time
Yeah.
there was you got to remember there was some illegal seal hunters out on the icebergs, and they saw the ship and they saw what was going on, but they refused to go and help because they was illegal,
Yeah.
you know, out there killing these seals. They didn't want to hand themselves in. They didn't want to get involved because they didn't want to get, you know, obviously they would have been arrested and probably hung, you know,
Yeah, of
that
course.
sort of thing. So they kept back. They actually witnessed it, you know, and from the witnesses that survived, you know, that managed to come, because there was a couple of stewards or engineers who survived the ship. One of them who never lived it down. I think he's the one that hung himself in the end, who went to court, because obviously that went to court, and before they'll pay out on the insurance, you know. So and I can't remember this guy's name now, but anyway, he went to court, and you know, his story was so unbelievable. Really, it just didn't make sense at all, according to the courts, you know.
So,
So I mean, this film that I've seen, you know, it's on YouTube for a lot of people to see, and it's been out since about 1996. It must have been. So it's been out quite a few years.
yeah.
You know, everything's in there, and National Geographica, you know, or whatever they call the magazines. I mean, they've got their reputation to think of. They wouldn't go around doing all this research and ruining their reputation on a lot of hearsays or, you know, a load of conspiracies, you know, that never made sense.
Yeah.
I mean, this video clearly shows the evidence. It clearly shows the transcripts. It shows the logs. It shows everything in detail. They've gone through every detail, and all the fingers point to the White Star Line and exactly what they did. They actually sent this ship out knowing that it was Olympic, but they changed the names over. It was done over a weekend, over in the night time, They paid some engineers to cut off the Olympic lettering and replace it with the Titanic. But the only thing they didn't bank on was the portholes, and they didn't bank on us coming around 8 years later, going down in submarines, taking photographs of it.
This
You
was
know,
unbelievable.
discovering the evidence.
Unbelievable.
And you've got to bear in mind as well. You've got to bear in mind as well that the Titanic normally carried freight of some description.
Yeah.
But this time it went out. It was very, very light. The only thing it was carrying apparently was woolen clothes.
With the people, yeah?
Or something.
Just with the passengers and woolen clothes.
Woolen sweats. And you got to remember that J.P. Morgan took all off his bronze, had his bronze statues removed 1 hour before the ship set sail. He phoned in sick or reported in sick. Said 11 hours before the ship sailed, and on top of that, 40 of his friends also did.
Yeah, there was.
So they was all aware of what was going on, and they backed out before. It's obvious.
Yeah, I mean, all round, what did Sir Winston Churchill, then in the Admiralty Department, gain by the sinking of the Titanic, like the Lusitania?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another thing. I mean, the conspiracy is like the what do you call it? Lusitania.
Lusitania, yeah. Sorry, I pronounced that wrong now.
And, I mean, that was Cunard Line, R.M.S. Lusitania. And that was back in about February 1915. But this is another conspiracy based on the Lusitania. This is in February 1915. The German government announced an unrestricted warfare campaign. This meant that any ship taking goods to Allied countries was in danger of being attacked. This broke international agreements that stated commanders who suspected that a non-military vessel was carrying war materials had to stop and search it, rather than do anything that would endanger the lives of the occupants. The Lusitania was at 32,000 tons, the largest passenger vessel on transatlantic service, left New York Harbour for Liverpool on the 1st of May in 1915. It was 750 foot long, weighed 32,500 tons, and was capable of doing 26 knots. On this journey, the ship carried 1,257 passengers and 650 crew. There was some concern on board, as a few days previously, the German embassy had published a statement that warned travellers intending to embark for an Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies, and Great Britain and her allies, and that the zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles, that in accordance with the formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters, and that travellers sailing in the war zone in ships of Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk. It was actually about 1:20 p.m. in the afternoon on the 7th of May in 1915 that a German U-20 boat, only 10 miles out from the coast of Ireland, surfaced to recharge her batteries. Soon afterwards, Captain Schweiger, the commander of the German U-boat, observed the Lusitania in the distance. Schweiger gave the order in advance on the liner. The U-20 had been at sea for 7 days and had already sunk 2 liners and only had 2 torpedoes left. The U-20 fired the first one from a distance of 700 meters. Watching through his periscope, it soon became clear that the Lusitania was going down, and so he decided against using the second torpedo. After a second larger explosion, the Lusitania rolled over and sank in 18 minutes. A total of 1,198 people died, 785 passengers and 413 crew. Those killed included was 128 United States citizens. The sinking of the Lusitania had a profound impact on public opinion in the United States. The German government apologized for the incident, but claimed its U-boat only fired one torpedo, and yet the second explosion was a result of a second cargo of heavy ammunitions on board the ship. If this was true, then Britain was guilty of breaking the rules of warfare by using a civilian ship to carry ammunition. British authorities rejected this charge and claimed that the second explosion was caused by a coal dust igniting in the ship's almost empty bunkers. It was unrealistic to expect that the Germans should treat the United States as neutral in the war when the United States had been shipping greater amounts of war materials to Germany's enemies. In early 1915, the British liner Lusitania was torpedoed and sunk by a German submarine. She sank in 18 minutes, and 1,198 people died, including 124 Americans. The United States claimed the Lusitania carried out an innocent cargo, and therefore the torpedoing was a monstrous German atrocity. Actually, the Lusitania was heavily armed. It carried 1,248 cases of 3-inch shells, 4,927 boxes of cartridges, 1,000 rounds in each box, and 2,000 more cases of small arms ammunition. Her manifests were falsified. How about this? Her manifests were falsified to hide this fact, and the British and American governments lied about the cargo. So that was the conspiracy that went down with the Lusitania. And these are the type of things that are carried out by our governments. You know, people, we're just numbers. We don't care, you know. They're not bothered. And they're doing the same thing today. They're doing the same in America. They're doing the same in Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran. They just want to carry on doing it. And they don't care. They always get what they want. This is what we're here for, people. And that's what we're here talking about.
That's it.
This is the wake-up calls.
Wake-up calls are starting to come. We'll start softly. We'll start softly. I know this story is so horrible. Both stories are so horrible. One being an insurance fraud, the other being a military exercise, or not exercise, but mission. It's tragic to.
Well, the Germans warned them. You know, this is the thing. The Germans warned every newspaper. They sent it out. You know, the day before the Lusitania set sail. That morning before it set sail, the Germans actually notified the Americans and British citizens, put it in the local medias. And yet the news failed to reach the passengers of the Lusitania. It was done on purpose. That was the other thing I was going to mention.
But you know, both these stories are tragic. They have a story of a banker, fraud, military, prime minister, a country corrupt. It just has everything to do with today in that story itself. Also,
nothing's changed at all, has it, Paul?
Nothing's changed. Nothing at all, my friend. We are seeing history repeating. As they say, history repeats itself. We just want to start off slowly, try and wake people up a bit quicker with the stories we start off with, and then moving into the hardcore domain, if you want, the hardcore conspiracies. But we do need to get people feeding us back with questions, comments. We need you guys to come. I mean, listeners are viewing, they're listening, but they ain't leaving comments. They ain't discussing this matter. It's like that you just don't want to know. Now, if you do want to know, please do start leaving your comments in the box below. You can see in descriptions any links that might be available to yourselves, tags, and also a link to my friend John here's channel. However, you know, to start these discussions, to start waking people up, everybody needs to chip in. So that's why we're asking for your comments, your questions, anything you would like to leave in the comments box below. Also, you can directly email myself here at the station. It's kbmsfm@hotmail.com. You can have a look at the website if you like, kbmsfmradio.tk. Now, John, thanks for joining us today, mate. We're going to have to wrap it up.
Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just? I'd like to leave the leave the channel for the YouTube channel for the listeners who are out there to check this out for themselves. The YouTube channel is LEXXTEX. So that's LexTex dash 276 dash the Titanic. If you looked up that on YouTube, you shouldn't go too far wrong. You'll find out what I've discovered, and you'll see the amount of work that's gone into that, and the conspiracy. It doesn't lie, you know. Anyway, thank you, Paul, for having me today, and thank you very much to all the listeners out there. And I'll see if I can dig up some more dirt for next week.
Okay, John, that's great. Thanks very much. And next week we will be discussing the NWO, the Bank of Families, everything to do with the Illuminati, not just Freemasons as everybody thinks they are, because as we know, Freemasons are the lower part of the pyramid structure, aren't they? Now, will you be helping us out on that matter?
Yeah, I'll come in on that. Yeah, I don't mind. I know a fair bit about the New World Order
Good
and
stuff.
Agenda 21, United Nations, Agenda 21. Yeah, I'd
Yeah,
love to get into
yeah.
that.
Of course,
That's
man.
one of my hot topics.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff, man. Okay, John, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll hear from you next week then.